two trains, friendship and gratitude. What makes America great? Is it what we have? Is it what we grow? Is it what we build? I think it's what we do. Americans have stepped up many times to help others in need. This is what was done for France when she was in need. I'd like to share the story of two trains that I think exemplify the power of good people working together. 4 factors contributed to food shortages during and after World War II. First, the military activity had wrecked transport infrastructure. Secondly, the Allies' invasion of North Africa in 1942 cut off Atlantic and Mediterranean trade, and France could not get imports. Thirdly, the lack of manpower, fuel, and fertilizers reduced the amount of land under cultivation and crop yields. In fact, by 1944, domestic agriculture output was 40% lower than average yields in the 1930s. Lastly, the Germans had not only demanded food for the occupation troops, but for German civilians as well. The French government abolished rationing in 1945. However, they only did this to promote national optimism before elections. There was not a large enough supply to meet the demand, and bread rationing was reinstituted in December 1945. People were so angry that riots began, and they burned their new ration cards. To accommodate the meat shortage, people who lived in apartments took to keeping guinea pigs to eat. Some people even ate pigeons they found in the public parks. The situation was so dire that authorities had to publish a warning saying cats were unsafe to use in stews. In 1941, people in the country were officially allowed to send parcels to their city-dwelling relatives. However, many of these parcels did not arrive in appetizing condition. Many were filled with maggots or were rotten, but they had to eat what they had to survive such difficult times. City dwellers without friends or family in the country started going on weekend hunting expeditions, returning with sacks of meat and produce. The need was great, and Americans decided to help. You may never have heard of the friendship train. Very few people seem to know about this small but fascinating piece of American history. So what was the friendship train? Where did it come from? Why did it exist? The vision of the friendship train appeared in American Thought and History on October 11th, 1947, in the columns and broadcasts of Drew Pearson. This noted columnist, journalist, and nominee for the Nobel Peace Prize conceived the idea of the train when in Europe. While there, he noticed that the communists were being lauded and thanked for their contributions of a few carloads of grain that had been delivered to Europeans. The great fanfare celebrating these meager gifts rankled Pearson. The columnist loathed the thought of communism in Europe. He believed that the United States could surpass the communists in sending food to the desperate, hungry Europeans. Announcing his idea of sending food across the Atlantic in his broadcasts and columns on October 11, 1947, Pearson asked Americans to donate food from their homes, kitchens, gardens, and fields. Described at the time as a token gift, the aid was symbolic of the Marshall Plan effort. Under the Marshall Plan, relief agencies were shipping millions of tons of food with very little fanfare or publicity. According to Drew Pearson, communists would whisper that the food had really come from the Russians and that the rich, fat Americans were doing nothing to help. One of his readers responded to his column, writing, "It seems to me that we should educate people and tell them where the food is coming from. Is this not possible to have information printed in their language and have booklets in the sacks of flour and grain?" Pearson believed so strongly in the idea that he donated $10,000 to get that drive started. His theory was that an act of friendship from the heart of America would help to relieve suffering and play an important role in building new democracies in Europe. His plea was fantastically successful. Immediately, towns, cities, and states formed plans to collect food and send it to the friendship train. This train was such an exciting and popular idea that competition among communities, counties, and states for having sent the largest contribution was part of the work and also part of the fun. There was no reward, but everyone wanted to be the top contributor. 5 weeks after Pearson's announcement on November 7th, 1947, the friendship train began its unprecedented odyssey across our country. Beginning in Los Angeles, there was a terrific send-off. It was truly an extravaganza. Spotlights splashed across the sky. Thousands of spectators were thrilled to be part of this occasion and to see the many celebrities like Eddie Cantor, Liz Taylor, and John Wayne. The cargo of this unique train consisted of 12 boxcars from the Los Angeles area. Among those contributing to the train were the Screen Actors Guild, which donated a boxcar of macaroni. Long Beach donated a boxcar of sugar. Glendale contributed a boxcar of flour. The Los Angeles donation was an inspiration to the rest of the country. Although the train traveled through only 11 states, every state contributed by sending its boxcars on trains to meet the friendship train at a junction or by sending trucks to meet the train. Many communities not on the original route insisted on giving, thereby causing delays along the way. In fact, the enormity of the donations, plus the mountainous terrain in the west, caused the train to divide, and at its end, there were 3 trains of boxcars headed for New York. In all aspects of the train's travel, no money was ever spent. The food, the transportation by rail and truck, the loading of the boxcars and trucks, the loading of the ship by the stevedores, and the use of the ships was donated. Americans could look themselves in the eye and say, "We did an outstanding job." The train began in Los Angeles on November 7th, 1947, and proceeded across the country through Pennsylvania and New Jersey before reaching New York City in 11 days. A northern branch assembled cars of aid as it passed through Indiana, Ohio, and New York before joining the main train at New York City. The size of the train grew. Originally, it was hoped to collect 80 train carloads of food, but the train ultimately collected over 700 cars of food, clothing, and fuel, paid in part by monetary donations. Many of the donations were made by individuals, such as individual cans of evaporated milk collected from junior high students. The estimated value of the donations was $40 million. The train was described at the time as effective propaganda for the ideological conflict with the Soviet Union, as well as a characteristically Quaker act by Drew Pearson. Roscoe Drummond of the Christian Science Monitor called it one of the greatest projects ever born of American journalism. On its way to New York, the friendship train passed the Freedom Train in Harrisburg. The Freedom Train was touring the country with some of the country's most priceless historical documents. Trenton was the only stop for the friendship train in New Jersey. Almost all communities sent their donations to the capital to be loaded onto the train. The southern section of the train arrived in the state's capital around 10 o'clock on November 17th. For some as yet undetermined reason, New Jersey began its food drive very late, not until November 12th. 5 days after the train had left Los Angeles, did the governor and mayors begin organizing committees and food drives. Citizens of Trenton itself raised $1,761 for the purchase of food and also donated enough groceries to fill half a carload. In Newark, donations were driven to Trenton by Irvington Steel and Iron Worker employees. Dugan and Fisher Bakeries sent tons of flour. Another truck hauled 3.5 tons of food, which had been contributed by the towns of Elizabeth, Kenilworth, Union, and Colonial. In Ridgewood, the village commissioners, the Citizens Food Committee, and the Board of Education, and the public school faculty and students set a goal of 5 tons for the Friendship Train. S. William Wallstrom, head of the Citizens Food Committee, managed the food drive. He declared at the start of the drive that Ridgewood was known for its generosity and quick response in direct need. I predict, he said, at least 5 tons of foodstuffs will go to Europe and Italy as Ridgewood's response to the hunger that prevails in those countries. The effort swung into high gear. Principals at all schools agreed to use their buildings as collection depots. Local merchants stocked as much of the required food as possible for the committee to purchase. On Friday evening and Saturday morning, volunteer faculty and students sorted and labeled packages. They loaded a village truck on Saturday morning so that it would be ready to depart at noon for Trenton, where its cargo would await loading on the Friendship Train on Monday. The estimated weight of the truck was 5 tons. Ridgewood had met its goal. Camden began an intensive food campaign on November 10th. Every individual, industry, club, business, and school became part of the drive. In Morristown, Hal Kerschel set up a booth for collecting funds. The county president of the PTA, Mrs. L.B. Stiles, called on all local chapters to help in the schools and asked town authorities to assist. Albert Miller and Elwood Sapp assisted Edwin Siegel, chairman of the committee. Siegel spoke to various organizations urging their support. A local architect headed a committee which collected from industries. The Mayor's Association of South Jersey, representing 37 districts, created procedures which would provide ways of collecting food and money. The county commander of the 40 American Legion posts stated that the local commanders of all posts would make house-to-house calls. More than 1,000 containers for money collection were placed in stores, tap rooms, and restaurants. Students at Camden and Woodrow Wilson high schools created posters for store windows throughout the city. The communities of Audubon and Collingswood raised $620 and $700 respectively. Camden's campaign slogan had paid off. If you don't give, they won't live. The zeal and effort throughout the county resulted in contributions filling 2 boxcars. Atlantic City sent 1 carload of groceries to Philadelphia to join the train there. James Giamarino of Gibbstown declared the entire community would be canvassed that weekend. Ventnor's mayor, Harry Hodson, appointed a committee of 35 to solicit donations, and Mayor Sylvester Bilbo of Paulsboro requested that policemen help collect money and food. In 2 days, parochial and public school children of Gloucester City collected a ton of food. Mount Ephraim children raised enough funds to purchase 11 pounds of sugar, 100 pounds of flour, 2 cases of evaporated milk, and 1 carton of rice and beans. Mount Ephraim police contributed $15 and a case of soap. Communities in Cape May County worked to raise enough for 1 boxcar of food. The Friendship Train arrived in Trenton on the evening of Monday, November 17th. Welcoming ceremonies were held the next morning at the Pennsylvania Railroad siding on East State Street. Governor Driscoll formally presented the Garden State's gift to Mayor Connolly, who in turn presented the rail cars to the French Consul General, Claude Lazard, and 2 Italian representatives. Both men spoke at the crowd, thanking them for the compassion and generosity. Mayor Connolly spoke on behalf of all the Garden State's mayors. He especially praised public and parochial school children for having collected more than 300 cases of canned goods. A group of children from Miss Carolyn Kibble's 4th grade class at Junior 5 asked Drew Pearson to take the Bible they had to children in France. Pearson promised he would do so. By 10 a.m., New Jersey's donation to the Friendship Train were bound for the waiting ships in New York Harbor. But last-minute contributions were still being collected. When the train reached New York, it was greeted by cheering people. The first cars were unloaded onto the U.S. ship American Leader, whose name was changed to the SS Friendship for its trip to France. Other ships were loaded, and some went to France, some to Italy, and some to other European nations. What the U.S. government hadn't been able to do in the 2 years after the war ended, the American people accomplished in just over 2 months, with the approval of, but no help from Congress. Every package had this label: all races and creeds make up the vast melting pot of America, and in a democratic and Christian spirit of goodwill toward men, we, the American people, have worked together to bring this food to your doorsteps, hoping that it will tide you over until your own food fields are again rich and abundant with crops. Also on every label were these words: this gift is sent to you by, and a tag had the name, first and last, and the address of the donor. This message was written in Italian and French and printed beside the American flag. Some Americans accompanied the goods to France, and they helped to distribute it. Jean Trancona, attaché of the French consulate in San Francisco, was quoted in a Reno newspaper on February 4th, 1949. He said, "The friendship train was without precedent in the history of the world. The French people were deeply touched." So how do you say thank you for this generous act? The Italian government in 1950 sent 2 pairs of golden statues to Washington, D.C. One pair is at the end of the Arlington Memorial Bridge. The other is a few yards away at the end of the Theodore Roosevelt Memorial Bridge. The French found a way to say merci that was more personal. A railway worker and Army veteran, André Picard, had the idea of sending a boxcar full of gifts to the people of America. A committee was formed and word spread. People were encouraged to give something precious. The gifts should be gifts of sacrifice and things that had special meaning. Mostly, they should be things of France. People responded in a variety of ways. Here are some examples of gifts. Seedling trees and plants that were native to France. Members of trade unions used their talents to fashion special gifts. A group of seamstresses made and donated 49 silk wedding gowns. Fashion designers made 49 mannequin dolls, each 2.5 feet tall, whose attire showed the fashion trends in France from 1700 to 1906. There were sabers, clocks, hand-painted platters, wooden shoes, a jeweled Legion of Honor medal that had belonged to Napoleon, valuable works of art, packages of French soil. Children sent toys. One of them was Helen Petit of Lyon. She sent a tan-colored stuffed toy dog, and attached to it was this note: I am sending you one of my preferred children, my big Lulu. It seems that I was 1 year old when Mimi offered it to me from my father, who was a prisoner of war in Germany. I love my Lulu very much, but I offer it to you in gratitude for all the Americans have done for my country, and also because the dog represents fidelity. I thought that I would keep it all my life, so it is with sorrow that I embrace Lulu for the last time. You will take good care of him and speak to him sometimes of his little French mistress. I am also sending you a picture of myself so you can see me and show me to my Lulu. I know that you will take my place near him. Without knowing you, I love you and embrace you with all my heart. Signed, Helen Petit, 10 years old. In all, more than 52,000 gifts were donated. They needed to be protected during shipment. Someone had the idea of filling boxcars, one for each state, one to be shared by Washington, D.C. and the territory of Hawaii. Another idea was to use a special type of boxcar, a 40 and 8. The 40 and 8 cars were built around 1870 for transporting goods. They were drafted into service during both World Wars. They were called 40 and 8s because they could hold 40 soldiers or 8 horses. Between 1940 and 1944, occupying German forces used 40 and 8s to transport troops, prisoners of war, horses, freight, and civilian prisoners to concentration camps. As France was liberated, 40 and 8s were used to transport Allied soldiers and materials to the shifting front through the war's end in 1945. Thousands of American veterans had strong memories of these cars. In March of 1920, Joseph W. Breen, a member of the newly formed American Legion, met in Philadelphia with 15 other prominent Legionnaires, where they originated the idea of the 40 and 8 societies. They envisioned a new and different level of elite membership and camaraderie for leaders of the American Legion. The boxcar of the French railways, so familiar to American ground troops of World War I and II, was chosen as the symbolic heart of the new organization. The French railroad theme was applied to officer titles and organizational functions. The society continues today as an independent, invitation-only honor society of American veterans and service members, more commonly known as the 40 and 8. The 40 and 8 is committed to charitable and patriotic aims. It was fitting that this model of car was chosen to transport the gifts. By 1949, in France, the boxcars were considered to be antiques. The committee scoured railroad yards and were finally able to locate 49 usable cars. Each was refurbished, painted, and decorated with diagonal stripes in red, white, and blue. On one side were French words that mean the train of French recognition. On the other side, in English, it said, Gratitude Train. Then the seals of each of the 40 provinces were affixed to the sides. Each car was given a number which corresponded to the state for which it was destined. The cars were made into a train which traveled to each province, collecting gifts from their citizens. After all the gifts were loaded, some of the cars received special labels. I don't know if you can see it, but the children are writing Merci. The train went to Le Havre, where the cars were loaded onto the French ore carrier Magellan. A large sign was painted on the side, which said, Merci, America. The ship entered New York Harbor on February 3rd, 1949. It was greeted by many small boats and tugboats. Fireboats shot streams of water high into the air. The Air Force sent new jet fighters to fly in formation over the ship. Thousands of people lined the shores and cheered. Several dignitaries were flown out to the ship as it found its way into Weehawken. Commander Vasili told the story of the origin of the Gratitude Train and the all-out effort of the French people to make it possible. The next day, there was a parade through New York City with over 200,000 people in attendance, shouting thanks to the people of France. One of the officials taking part was Louis Cast, president of the French National Committee of the Gratitude Train. He had come on another ship, and he brought a torch which had been lit on January 20th at the eternal flame of the tomb of the unknown soldier in Paris. It was turned over to the American Legion and taken to Arlington, Virginia, to be united with the eternal flame of the unknown soldier there. The parade culminated with the New York boxcar being placed in City Hall Plaza, where the mayor officially accepted the car and its contents. The rest of the cars were loaded onto flatbed railroad cars because the couplings on the cars wouldn't work with American equipment. Ultimately, 3 trains pulled cars to different parts of the country, the South, New England, and the West. The Merci Train committee from France flew around the country, trying to attend ceremonies in the state capitals. Drew Pearson traveled with them, reporting on their reactions to sites such as the Grand Canyon in his column. Each car was greeted with a ceremony, and the gifts were officially accepted by the governor. So what happened to the cars and the gifts? Today, many of these boxcars stand in their respective states as a testament to these two incredible displays of goodwill. Most are in the care of 40 and 8 societies. Some cars are in museums, like this one in Woonsocket, Rhode Island. This car spent 20 years in a scrapyard until someone found it and got it restored. This wedding dress was one of the gifts given to Rhode Island. Some are at American Legion posts and veterans facilities. Some were destroyed, like New Jersey's car, which burned. Some of the gifts are in museums. Some are displayed in the cars, and many are lost. The New Jersey gifts, I'm told, were given in part to schools. There's some that are in a storage at the State Museum in Trenton, but you have to ask in advance to see them. I saw my first car at a railroad museum in Ogden, Utah. This is where I first learned about the Merci Train. Since then, I've tried to see others. The New York car is now at an American Legion post in Whitesboro, New York. 2 veterans were able to obtain it and began the task of restoring it. They each took out second mortgages on their homes so they could build a shelter for the car. A Boy Scout built a ramp up to the door for his Eagle project. Once the car was protected from the weather, they started work on the interior. Unfortunately, both men passed away and their widows were not interested in pursuing the project, so the interior was unfinished when I saw it. Hopefully, some other members will step up one day and finish the job. If you're interested in seeing one of the cars, you can start with a website about the Merci Train, but let me tell you that many of the cars have moved since it was published. The American Legion may be able to help tell you about the state car. My husband and I found several by researching and sometimes by luck. Here are some of the ones we found. The one in Fresno, California was at an American Legion post and had been newly refurbished. And the one in Seward, Delaware, is sitting outside the American Legion. Holly, I'm hoping you can see where these things are. The one in Florida, we were just driving up the coast and suddenly I yelled, "There's the Merci car." We had no idea it was there. The one in New Haven,
Kentucky.
in Kentucky. The one in Norman, Oklahoma, when we saw it, was sitting on the grass outside a state mental institution. The one in Woonsocket was so fun because they had the gifts so nicely displayed. And the one in Texas had been beautifully restored. As I said, the one in Utah was outside, and the one in West Virginia we found had gotten a protection. In Sedalia, Missouri, it's at the state fairgrounds. Whether you go to see one of the cars or not, whether you do any of your own research, I hope that you will remember a time when Americans did something really great and France said, "Merci."